This is the Friday, June 1st, 2018 version of the Market Plus segment. Joining us now is Darin Newsom. Darin, welcome back.
Thank you, Delaney.
Darin, we got quite a few great social media questions this week, so I'm kind of just going to go down the list here. Let's start out here with Troy in Cobb, Wisconsin. He's looking for some insight on the crude oil markets.
Okay.
How high or how far high could it go, and how might it influence the commodities throughout the summer months?
I think it's topped. We got it up into the 70s. We couldn't quite get it to 80, at least on the West Texas Intermediate market. I think it's topped. You know, we've seen our seasonal demand push. We always see that over the course of the spring. And then when you get into late May through mid-June is when you normally see a top in the crude oil market, gasoline, and heating oil, and so on. So I think we've put a high in the market now. I think we're going to come down. We're going to get some bounces along the way. But with OPEC talking about taking off its production cuts, you know, I think we've got some room now for the market to go down.
If producers haven't locked in those fuel needs yet for the summer, should they be waiting, or do you think they should lock in now?
You know, I'd be waiting.
Okay.
Because to me, we have just started to break. You know, this was the first serious week that the first serious sell-off we've seen over the course of a week. It was a shortened week. Come back next week. I think we've got some more room to go down.
Okay. Let's take another question here from Richard in Belle Eagle, Nebraska, or excuse me, Tennessee. King Cotton is back doing his royal strut, and KDD, who you mentioned worked at DTN with you, says cotton is booming even in Kansas. What do you say? You know,
it is. You know, going back to earlier this spring, you know it's dry in Kansas where they're abandoning wheat, and this is Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, abandoning wheat and they're putting cotton in. Now, cotton is a long-term commitment. You know, if you're going to go out and get the equipment and do all this, it's hard on the land. It's, you know, it's tough on the land. But yeah, I think we're seeing more. I think we saw more acres go over into cotton. Wheat was abandoned; they went into cotton. Now cotton's still suffering from the effects of weather. You know, we talked about Alberta in the show, but we've still got, you know, the severe drought going across the southern plains. So I think more acres went in. We'll see what it does to overall production. Right now, it doesn't really seem to be slowing down the price much.
Where do you think we're going to end up then, with that being said, having some wheat acres switch to cotton?
Yeah, I think in the long run, we won't know till January what final acres are. We'll see a lot of
guesses. Do you have any guesses, I guess I should say?
I'm not going to get into the guessing game as far as acres. I'll let USDA do all the guessing. But I do think we're going to see, you know, again, we're going to see larger acres than what we saw last year. Some of it's being built in. I think it's the yield, though, that's going to be the question. I think yield's going to be down again because of the weather in both the southeast and across the southwest plains. And
as you mentioned during the regular portion of the show, definitely adding some support to the cotton markets. I didn't get to ask this during the main portion, but what are you looking for some support price level-wise? You
know, it didn't leave any. When you get a straight up market. So we've got the D's contract sitting up around 93, 94 cents right now. How high could it go? No idea. You know, when you get these rocket rides, you have to just kind of ride them out. When it tops and it didn't leave any support underneath, it's got a long way to come back down. I don't see that happening because I think we're still going to be tighter supply. But it is going to have a lot of room to come down once we get through this spring-summer time frame.
Okay, so something that we'll continue to watch and see. Another question here. Greg would like to know, do you think the Packers will buy sports teams with their record profits this summer?
Well, it's probably not the Packers he's talking about, but they could buy the Lions because they're not buying any championship history, and they're probably relatively cheap. I say that for my friends Angie and Phil. But the Packers themselves, the Livestock Packers, I visited with John Harrington, DTN senior livestock analyst, about this, and what we're seeing right now, yes, we're seeing extraordinary profits being made by the Packers. But this is a seasonal move. Yes, it's stronger than it normally is, but so are so many other, just like so many other markets. But this tends to peak in mid-June, you know, somewhere in that mid-June timeframe. By the time we get to July, those Packer margins are starting to fall back off. So it's extraordinary. It's rough. You know, it seems completely out of line. And from a numbers point of view, it is. From a calendar point of view, this is what usually happens.
So when we look at the mid-June time, are we going to see some of the Packer margins that they're losing transfer into either the cash or futures contracts?
It might transfer some, but you know, I think the biggest thing we're going to see is just start to see those margins start to come down. We're going to start to see some of the buying start coming back out of the market. I don't think you're going to see these big pushes that we've got going on in the cash side right now.
Okay. Let's take another question here Phil in Ontario at Agrodome, one of our favorites here. What scenarios do you see for December corn? What are the support and resistance levels going forward? And based on the past 2 years' history and seasonality, has the late spring / early summer top come early?
Yes, to the last question.
Okay, that's quite a lot there we can break down.
Yeah, I think the summer top is, I think the early summer top that usually occurs about the first week of June, second week of June, I think we've put it in place. That was up around 425 on its weekly close, only chart. Where do I think it could fall? If we look at the seasonal pattern, it could fall to about $4. That's not a lot of pressure. Could it go lower than that? Absolutely. I mean, if we get into the the heart of summer and we get into say July, late July, maybe into early August, and we've had ideal weather, and we're starting to talk about possibility of 175, 176, 177 bushel per acres again, we're going to go lower than 4. We're going to drag it back down below 4. Do I see the market collapsing this year? No, because again, we don't have the competition on the world stage. But once we rebuild our stocks, once we add to our stocks, then the market's got more room to go down as we get towards the end or towards the middle to the end of the 18-19 marketing year and looking ahead to the next crop.
Okay, and are there any months specifically you're watching? Are you watching the December?
Right now I'm watching the Dees contract. That's the one that's most interesting because that's the new crop contract. So I'm certainly going to watch how that works over the summer. Because summer's always pivotal for the December corn contract, November beans contract. But yeah, I'm going to be keeping a close eye on the Dees and Nov beans.
Okay. Let's take another question here as we look at weather. You mentioned earlier in the program to me that Glenn in Bryan, Ohio had a great question, so we want to make sure we get that answered. When will the market start reacting to the predictive seasonal talk about a potential drought in both the Midwest and South America?
Yeah, Glenn and I talked about this, and I asked him to send this question in. And when he sent it to me, it was a and when he sent this question in, it's a great question, and it goes along with the seasonality that we talked about before in the program. And so, when are we going to see this seasonal talk of drought really start to come into play? And my response is different than most people. Is it already has? We talked about it in the program. The most important drought that we're going to see this year happened this past February in Argentina, starting in Argentina and spreading into southern Brazil. That's the most important, that is the critical drought event that we're going to see, because without that, we're looking at probably a collapse across the board in American agriculture. But it didn't happen because we had that drought. So let's say it gets hot for 10 days here in the United States. There's going to be a lot of talk about it. Analysts are going to get all worked up, and markets are going to get excited, but it doesn't mean anything. The real damage has already been done. The real change in global supply and demand was already done, and that was this past February. Okay,
so something that's already been priced into the market as well.
I think that, that part of it's been priced in. Now, if it gets to where it just refuses to rain here in the United States, then all these scenarios about people talking about $5, $6 corn, certainly it could come true. There's no reason why it can't. But I'm not going to sit and wait for that to happen.
And we can't predict the weather, so.
No, I can't predict the weather anymore. I can predict markets.
Well, I'm certainly sure you wish you could at sometimes. Let's take another one here from Jeff in Lincoln, Nebraska. What should trigger a farmer's decision to sell new crop corn right now?
I would look at seasonality, for one thing. Of course, I always watch price patterns. But also, how does it fit in? We got up to 425. Does that work for you? I mean, can you price some of it in there? Can you put some sort of protection in place, be it options, based on the idea of seasonality, turning markets, that we've got the possibility of some non-commercial money coming out of corn for a while. All of these things can come into play. But the bottom line is, how does it fit with your P&L? I mean, if you can make money when it's up in that 420, 425, why not pull the trigger on some of it?
And I think maybe we should clarify, just so producers at home know what you mean when you say seasonality. Are you talking about compared to this time last year?
What I look at is the seasonality, say going back in corn right now, I'm comparing to, I usually compare to 5 and 10 years.
Okay.
So what's it done over the previous 5 years? What's it normally do this time of year over the last 10 years? And if I look at both of those patterns, what I see is this early June time frame to get some sales on the books. Everyone say, oh no, because the critical months are June, July. That's not the way the market behaves. The market usually puts a top in before everyone calls it a critical time frame.
Okay. Let's take a couple more questions here. John in Iowa said, how is the trucker strike in Brazil and the proposed tax increases in Argentina impacted Chinese demand for soybeans and source of beans?
Pump some life into the U.S. soybean market that would be dead otherwise. We're in the time of year where we usually don't ship anything. but now we're still shipping soybeans. So yeah, the trucker strike, that lasted 9, 10 days, whatever it was. The fact that Argentina's crop, soybean crop, is dismal. Yeah, both of those have come into play. Both of those has kept China interested in United States supplies of soybeans, and probably will here through at least the end of the marketing year, at the end of August. And I think it's going to tighten up even more and get even more interesting when we get into that September-October time frame.
For sure. A couple more here. Lee, in Wisconsin, we've talked about this a little bit or alluded to it a little bit, but will the sudden weather that we've have any impact on traders' view of the crop?
Traders, at least back in the day when humans traded the market, they were always interested in the weather. And now that algorithms do most of the trade, you just feed it in the latest weather forecast and it'll churn out a few trades here, a few trades there. So yeah, it's different, but it's still the same. So yes, we get into this time of year, and weather's going to be what everybody talks about every day, every week. But as we see in the seasonal patterns, it's really not that important, because we usually wind up making a crop somehow, unless it's wheat. But yeah, traders will pay attention, and traders will trade it.
Okay, we have just one final question here, and it's a corn question. Craig in Adams, Minnesota says, have we seen the marketing high for corn since corn was in the red this week?
I would say we've seen the 17-18, we've seen the summer high. I would say we've seen the summer high for corn, unless. Throw out an unless, going to have to put an asterisk on it, unless something does happen with the weather. Because again, the competition that we were expecting from Brazil, Argentina, other countries isn't there. So if we continue to ship corn at this extraordinary pace that we're seeing here as we get further into the second half of the 17-18 marketing year, it's going to tighten up the supplies. So then we get any sort of weather scare that could lead to new highs. I don't think it's going to happen. I'm not expecting it. I'm not positioning myself for new highs, but they could certainly happen.
You touched on something that I want to just end with here as we wrap up Market Plus. Can you give us a quick update on where the Brazilian corn crop does sit? As you mentioned there, quality is a concern.
The second crop, the safrinha crop, what we see every time we get a headline on this, or every time we get an update on this from Brazil itself, they're chopping more off of that crop. They're taking it down, they're ratcheting it down. And so what we'll finally see is eventually we're going to see that also reflected in USDA WASDE reports. So, those production numbers are going to continue to come down. And as those numbers come down, global supplies come down, and that just means more interest still on the U.S. market. So yeah, it just keeps getting ratcheted down a little bit each week. How much further it could go, I don't know.
Okay, definitely something we'll continue to watch.
Absolutely.
Darin Newsom, always a pleasure.
All right, thanks, Delaney.
Join us again next week when we explore how legislators and lawmakers are pondering the future of ditch mowing. And John Roach will sit across from me at the Market to Market table. Until then, thanks for watching, listening, or reading. I'm Delaney Howell. Have a great week.